Welcome back. Wes Mitchell here, Chris Clark, talking a little Gamecock football as always, and continuing our roster breakdown videos. Today we're talking linebackers, and if you haven't seen our other videos, go back. We were trying to think of which ones we've even done yet. I know we've done quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, and then we did edge guys on the defensive line. So we're going to stay on the defensive side, but today going with linebackers. And Chris, I think if you're going to talk South Carolina linebackers, I think you have to start with Ernest Jones. He's the guy, to me, made a big step, I would say last year, as far as just being someone who sort of took over as one of the leaders on the defense, even though he was just a true sophomore. Obviously the loss of TJ Brunson from that group is tough, but I think Ernest already sort of as the middle linebacker, as the guy who was calling the defense, and just from a personality standpoint, he's got leader written all over him. And I think we've seen him take some ownership of this defense. He's one of the best talkers as far as meeting with the media and sort of giving you an idea of the mindset of the team and of the position group. And he's one of these guys who I think wants to push his teammates, wants to push the guys around him. So if you're looking maybe even for the defense as a whole, but certainly for the linebackers, to me, the guy right in the center, the guy that's sort of going to take some ownership and be the one who emotionally drives this unit, it's got to be Ernest Jones this year.
Yeah, I think you're right. In that comment that you sort of referenced, I think that was back in the spring, right? And he was basically just asked by the media, is this your defense? He said, yeah, this is my defense. So definitely leader. I'm not surprised. I remember when Ernest was getting recruited out of Ware County High, he played for Franklin Stevens over there, who's now at McEachern, I believe, big program in Georgia, and has always done a really good job. And Will Muschamp's recruited or been in contact with a bunch of his players over the years, and he always produces some good ones. And Ernest was a guy that sort of flew under the radar a little bit. He was I think a lower 3-star prospect. I think South Carolina beat Duke on him, because he was really concerned about academics, he and his mom, and got in on him early and really liked him, and he wasn't a guy that he didn't go to a bunch of camps. He maybe wasn't going to go out and, put down 4.4s on the stopwatch or anything, but he was just a really good football player, really developed. And I think he's developed a lot even at South Carolina, and really started to blossom last year. And I think he's coming to his own as a football player as well. So he's going to be a key guy this year, just setting the defense, getting the calls in. Obviously, as the Mike, he's going to be counted on to make a lot of plays himself, in the run game, in the pass game. And I'm not surprised, at his progression in terms of his leadership ability or his mental capability, because I think you could see a lot of that, just talking to him in high school. I think he was a natural fit for it.
Yeah, all right, so I think if you're going to sort of, I guess, start to produce a little makeshift hypothetical depth chart here, Ernest Jones locked in, pinned in. We want him to say penciled in. He's on the depth chart. He's a starter. He's a guy. Next, I think we have to start to look at Sherrod Green being someone whose playing time probably goes up again. We saw him early on in his career play quite a bit. We saw him sort of, I would say, lose, at least coming into the year, lose his starting position from the year before, but then really found a home at that Sam spot where South Carolina would have 3 linebackers on the field. They're in a 4-3 look, and then you would have, obviously, Ernest Jones in the middle, TJ Brunson at the will, and Sherrod at the Sam. Well, obviously the Sam is only on the field when they're in a 3-linebacker look. So as far as starters, the base defense, when they're in a nickel, the other linebacker who's going to be playing on the field pretty much at all times, unless, you're just giving them a breather, I think for this year probably ends up being Sherrod Green, shifting back to the will linebacker spot. I believe the way T-Rob talked, they've even done some things differently as far as how they're training up those 2 spots. I think sort of trying to make it a little bit easier, making it more of sort of a cross-training deal where the Will and the Sam sort of get trained up very similarly as far as how everything's structured in practice is what I took away from what T-Rob said. He didn't quite go into details. But I know before the Sam and the Buck were very tied together. But I personally think if South Carolina's defense is going to be at its best, and we'll talk about some other guys who are going to factor in here, but Sherrod as a senior, Hard to believe he's a senior now. But Sherrod Green is a senior and someone who's now played a bunch in his career, and I thought played very well last year. Going to be a big year for him, but I think he's your other starter alongside Ernest Jones.
I'd have to agree. I think it's, at some point it becomes about getting the best guys on the field. And so T-Rob has said, and you're right, we'll dive into some of the guys in a little bit, but, South Carolina is probably going to be in a decent amount of three linebacker. I think he gave the percentages back in the spring of what they were in last year. I think it was in the 30s, Wes, wasn't it? Somewhere around there, maybe low 30s, and said it could even be more this year, just depending. And so they're going to have that a lot. Now, so do they move Sherrod around there in that configuration? We don't know, but it seems to make a lot of sense that if you're in a two-backer set and you're playing a nickel, that you're going to put your best and your most experienced guys out there. And Sherrod certainly seems to be one of those top two guys right now alongside Ernest. Remember back to the recruitment, Wes. I mean, Sherrod ranked a little bit higher than Ernest Jones, but a little bit of a similar path. I think he did go to some camps, but maybe wasn't super, super highly recruited. The South Carolina staff really loved the kid, and he went through some bumps along the way, to where he would have some moments of playing well. He struggled at other times as a young player, and maybe he played a little bit. Maybe he was forced into some action at times, like some of the older players when they were younger. South Carolina staff, had to play Rick Sandage early and Keir Thomas early. Some of those guys come to mind. So maybe Sherrod got caught in that a little, to be honest. But I think he really, like you said, played well last year. I think he had probably his most consistent year. So I think they're really expecting a lot for him, and playing him at the will position makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, so I think then the question with this group becomes who's the third guy? And whether it's structured where, Sherrod is still playing some Sam and the other guy slots in at will, or just say Sherrod is the will, period, the will dime, I guess they call it. And then you're just sliding in the other guy at the Sam. I've got a list, and I think all these guys have a shot at it, Chris. Damani Staley is now a senior. He's not really been a starter, during his career, but has continued to sort of be someone who comes in a reserve role, has played a lot on special teams. Jamar Brown, we saw him play a lot last year as a true freshman. I think someone that they're very high on and probably, maybe is a future starter potentially at that will spot down the road. You look at Rosendo Lewis, who has dropped some LBs, probably is in the best shape of his life, actually got some love from the coaching staff this spring, is having a really good start to the spring. You look at the freshman, I think someone that they were very excited about. We'll go into him in a little more detail, I think, later on. But Mo Kaba, if he was healthy and able to go through the 5 practices in the spring, I think he's pushing for a starting position. And then the forgotten man is Gilbert Edmond, who is a kid that was a final sort of late day of signing day signee for the Gamecocks, and was more, I think, of an edge rush guy in high school. Could eventually grow into that in college, but at least as far as South Carolina goes, they had him on signing day pegged as a more linebacker type. So I really think, you sort of always look, okay, here are the guys that you have sort of the questions are answered. That these guys are going to fit in somewhere. Then what's left? And I think you've got 2 spots pretty locked down, I think is how it will play out. The third spot, though, you could really make a case. I doubt Gilbert Edmond will quite be ready. But the other guys, Damani Staley, Jamar Brown, Rosendo Lewis, Mo Kaba, depending on health, I think all those guys probably are in the running for that third spot. And then after that, those guys sort of fill in as your backup spots, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, Staley, again, another one where it's hard to believe he's a senior, another guy out of that 2017 class that Sherrod Green was in too. And, does he have a ton of on-field experience in terms of snaps? Not a ton, but he has played some there. He's played some meaningful snaps at times, and he's played a lot of special teams during his career. So he's a guy from an experience standpoint that has a good bit. The guy I really look at, Wes, is Jamar Brown, because he's someone who's shown some flashes, really good in coverage, has gotten bigger, but he's really athletic. He has a nose for the football, and he's someone that South Carolina staff has really, really liked. dating back to his high school days, he was extremely high on their board, and they were able to go get him out of a really good program down in South Florida. So, that's the guy for my money that I look at like upside potential ability. And I have a hard time shaking the feeling that he may end up being that third guy. Now, Staley, I think, is certainly going to be in the conversation. Mo Kaba, if healthy, and if he can come along mentally, I really, really like his upside too. Edmonds just, I don't know if you can expect that much from him because he's transitioning from being, more of an edge player to someone that's playing a true linebacker position.
Yeah, so if Jamar Brown is your guy, then, basically you're looking at, okay, Jamar Brown is your third starter. Then you probably slot Damani Staley as the backup at the will potentially, Rosendo Lewis as the backup at the Mike potentially, and then we'll say Mo Kaba as your backup at the Sam. So let's say just hypothetically that's your 6 guys. What are your expectations for that group? I think we saw – and things in football get mentioned all the time, but sometimes you get to see it actually play out before your very eyes. And the defensive line and the linebackers are always linked. And sometimes when linebackers struggle, you'll hear people say, well, the defensive front has got to play better as well. And some people take that as an excuse. Some people take that as just a fact of life. I think we saw last year, Chris, taking nothing away from the linebackers, I thought they themselves played well. I think we saw right in front of our very eyes the difference between good defensive line play for linebackers and struggling defensive line play, because I think if you go back, 2 years ago, there was a lot of talk about linebackers not making enough plays. Then you look last year, defensive line plays much better, I thought. You got big Javon Kinlaw in there disrupting things, and all of a sudden linebackers are making more plays. So what are your expectations for this group? The more we've talked to defense this offseason, the more I've felt like South Carolina's defense has a chance to be pretty good. And I think if Ernest Jones and Sherrod Green play up to their potential, then this isn't maybe necessarily an all-SEC, like, hyped group that people are going to be talking about around the conference. But I think as far as doing what South Carolina needs them to do, this could be quietly one of the best units on the team, actually.
I think it's a good point because, look, if linebackers are able to run free to the football and, they're not taking on blocks, if the defensive line is good enough to be able to get that, Javon Kinlaw, he was just wrecking shop a lot of times up front, whether it was one-on-ones and getting penetration, forcing a running back to move to a different spot, and then a linebacker's waiting on him or making plays develop more slowly, whether it's taking on a double team and freeing up a linebacker. That's a lot of what he could do. DJ Wanham, so technically sound, always in the right spot. So that really helps your linebackers. And on top of that, look, TJ Brunson just got drafted. He was a good player at South Carolina. Ernest Jones sort of came into his own last season. Sherrod Green, as we said, played his best ball, and they had Jamar Brown out there as well at times in certain situations. So, I think it was a combination of those two things. So this year there are some questions up front, but how do you replace Kinlaw? The good news is you've got guys like Sandage and Zach Pickens sort of waiting in the wings to take another step. You do have some talent up front. You got some depth. So if you could stay healthy and still play well, now you've got the same group of linebackers minus Brunson, who is a loss, with what he brought to the table. But you mostly got the same group with some guys a year older and maybe some young talent who can continue to come along and supplant those guys. And so there is some depth. There's some guys like Rosendo Lewis, like Jamar Brown, even Staley as a senior who maybe haven't shown as much yet because they're continuing to develop or they've had some guys in front of them that I think can step forward. So I do think, past that first group, there's going to be a drop-off, but that's to be expected. And so I think there's some things to like in terms of the depth and the potential of this group.
Mo Kaba, to me, I always look for wild cards in a group. Who's the guy that not that he hasn't been talked about. He has been talked about. But who's the guy from maybe the casual fan? Who's the guy that people don't quite know yet that could just step up and be a dude? And every year you have a guy or two that just is ready. And we see it with true freshmen all the time. Some guys just take a natural fit to college ball, and they naturally go play. And do they get better? Do they learn as they go? Yes, but they just have a knack for doing what they need to do to get on the field. The injury obviously has set Mo Kaba back. He had, for those who don't know, he had a knee injury in high school. He was still rehabbing that this spring. That will be one thing I think we're going to want is an update on him when South Carolina does get back as soon as possible. How are things coming along as far as the knee? Because if this guy is healthy, to me, the people I talked to, Chris, put Mo Kaba right in the same conversation with Marshawn Lloyd and Luke Doty as far as excitement in this class and how they carry themselves. This kid, ever since the recruiting process, I can remember talking to him then and thinking, this guy's a professional at 18 years old. Like, that's just the way he carries himself. That's the way Luke Doty carries himself. That's the way Marshawn Lloyd carries himself. So he fits in with those guys. He's got some leadership qualities. He's one of those guys that's just going to do what it takes to get where he needs to be mentally and physically to get on the field. I know Mo Kaba has a bright future at South Carolina. That's not even a question. To me, the question is, can he go ahead and start finding some playing time this year? And if so, what does that look like? We've seen a true freshman for South Carolina at the linebacker position play snaps pretty much every year since Muschamp has been here, at least in a backup role. So does he sort of become that guy as a true freshman that maybe even, is the next one on the field behind these other guys? Because I think we both agree, man, Mo Kaba is someone for South Carolina fans to be really excited about down the line.
Yeah, I think he does play in some capacity this year. And look, the knee, he's had a lot of time to recover, and obviously that's a long road mentally and physically, but, he's doing really well with it. He was able to go through spring, and that, I think, helped him with that acclimation period of just, everything from academics, socially, to figuring out, okay, what's my schedule like with this football team, being able to rehab at the facility, go through, even if it's just mentally, go through spring practice for the 5 practices that they did have. I think that's huge.
Yeah, he was here for spring, but not able to go to practice for spring.
Right, just mentally. Yeah, just mentally going through those reps, I think, just being able to watch, being able to participate in the meetings. I think those things are significant, even if he's sidelined. And then, he's able to rehab, alongside the rest of the team and work out with those guys with whatever he could do. So, I think those things are big. And, he's a guy that I think he sort of reminds me of another Muschamp guy and Jared Davis a little bit when you look at him, just a big guy who can run, who's physical, and is always around the football. So long term, I'm with you. I think he's got a huge upside. But, I think there's still an opening there. We talk about these sort of top 3 guys, top 2 at least, top 3 guys. And I do think there's an opening for somebody to slide in and look, play special teams or just pull down some snaps at linebacker. And, if I had to peg it, if I had to put some kind of money on it, I do think he plays in some capacity this year and shows some flashes.
The other aspect here we haven't talked about at all is you have a new coach joining the group in Rod Wilson. And, I think you look obviously, I think Coleman Hutzler did a pretty good job with the group. There were times, I think, during Hutzler's career at South Carolina that the fan base was on him a little bit, probably last year, or the year before this past year, I should say. Last year, I think because they performed well, everybody was like, oh, this guy's a pretty good coach. For the most part, I think Hutzler did a good job with the special teams as well. But I think everybody we talked to is excited about Rod Wilson and excited for Rod Wilson to get back to South Carolina. This is his home, both from a school standpoint and from a state standpoint. I think and I think if you're Rod Wilson, you're probably pretty happy about what you have to work with, pretty happy about what you have coming in. And, one thing we always try to talk about in these videos, and we're going to get out of here in a second, is the future of the position. I think you look, Jamar Brown, true sophomore this year. We talked about Mo Kaba, true freshman this year. And then you have a couple of guys in Trinelius Tatum committed, Bryce Steele committed. Obviously, they're in on several other guys. If they can add Jordan Poole, the North Carolina linebacker, to that too, that's probably the best linebacker class on paper they've maybe ever signed, I think. But, Rod Wilson is someone who I think will provide a little bit, maybe a little different personality than Coleman Hutzler. But I'm sort of I'm excited for Rod. I think as a guy who most people I talk to that played with him say he's just a great human being. But I think it's going to be a good fit for South Carolina with Rod Wilson taking over this group.
Yeah, and I mean, a really bright coach, obviously just coming off a Super Bowl and a really good organization with the Chiefs, and he got to coach a lot of talent there, no doubt, working with the special teams. But he's got college experience coaching linebackers at Charleston Southern, played the position himself in the SEC and at a high level in the NFL. So I think there's a lot of knowledge, and you're exactly right. I'll sort of piggyback off of you there. I mean, everybody you talk to raves about the guy in terms of what kind of person he is and his football knowledge. And it'll be a different voice, it'll be a different style. But I think he's going to bring a lot of positives to the table, whether it's helping out on special teams and helping to bring some concepts there, or coaching the linebacker position. And I think he does have some guys, whether it's older guys or younger guys that he can continue to work with. And I think he's already done some solid work helping out in recruiting, and we'll continue that going forward.
Yep. All right, that's going to do it for us. He is Chris Clark. I'm Wes Mitchell. As always, want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube. Just hit the subscribe button right there on the bottom right-hand part of the video, and we'll have daily content from here on out. So I hope you're enjoying it. I should say. Also on GamecockCentral.com, we still have our free trial until August promotion going on. So just go on there, hit the link at the top of the screen, or just type in Gamecocks 2020 in the promotion field, and you'll get a free trial until August. For Chris, I'm Wes. We'll see you next time.